Greetings, everyone. I am Dr. Noni Davis, and I am here today to continue on this journey of sharing with you about the wonderful history that I'm learning. Um, I want to always acknowledge my mother, Sylvia Davis, and my late father, William Edward Davis, who are the reason why I am here and who also led the foundation of St. C Academy, this African Center School that I have had the luxury and um, uh, the honor of continuing to train African American children and diaspora children as well, um, to become lovers of themselves and um, but just uh, aware of who they are and understanding the contributions that their people have made to this land and to the world. And so today I want to focus on Black revolutionaries. I felt like this was, we've already started with the Underground Railroad and the you know this this extreme intelligence our people have demonstrated in the fight for liberation. And with the selection cycle that we're in right now, I'm not sure that we do not need to go and revisit some of the things that these Black revolutionaries had accomplished. Um, Next week, this time, we will be voting. For those of us who have not voted, that November 5th is the date. And so this week, I just said, well, let me just go ahead and talk about some of these people who were fighting for us. And then next week, I will talk about these women who were fighting. But today, I wanted to focus on some of the men. My own personal definition of a Black revolutionary, I got my glasses on because they've got this blue light here, but so I'll take them off when I don't need to read necessarily. But what is a revolutionary? So for me, a person who desires and pursues radical change in political, economic, or other environment is a revolutionary who desires and pursues radical change. Why? Um, these are people who are emboldened to make these changes, often to ensure freedom by any means necessary. How do these Black revolutionaries do this? Well, they create pathways toward change through protest, through organizing, through sabotage, sometimes violence, sometimes peacefully. And where and when. This is like, so that's an easy one, is wherever and whenever a problem where people are trying to deny other folks their freedom, that's when it's gonna rise. This is when they're gonna come through. So I wanted to start with David Walker because I'm here in North Carolina. And David Walker is a very interesting person. I do have his picture right here, and I'm going to show it to you real fast. Um, David Walker. David Walker is interesting because he was born in Wilmington, North Carolina. He was born to a free Black woman and a enslaved father in 1796. There's some issue about, and I've seen 1786, but I went and did some research through PBS and other uh, um, sources, and so there is more of a consistency with the 1796. But he wrote this pamphlet called David Walker's Appeal, and this appeal rattled the South. It just unnerved white people so badly that there was an actual bond up to $10,000 on his head. And $10,000 back then, well, I found out that $2,000 in in 1730 was about the equivalent of almost 60,000. So a $10,000 would have been like almost $100,000, I guess. If 2,000 was only is the equivalent of 60, then yeah, they put money out there for him. Um, his what inspired him to become this revolutionary was that he had the unfortunate experience of watching a black boy having to literally beat his mother to death at the command of a white slave owner. And so when he, he just it rattled his nerves. So he decided to be this revolutionary. And when he grew up, I mean, he did attend school and he was well educated and he traveled across the country and he ended up in Boston. And I think they said he was a store owner. He sold used clothes up there, but he also joined an advocacy group, and he was engaged in publishing. So he joined the Freedom's Journal, which was the first African American newspaper in New York, and became a leading spokesperson against slavery in Boston and in New York. Um, he wrote this appeal and he made 3 editions of it. So the first edition, the appeal was written for black people, straight up. So who were the people who were enslaved? Okay, the people in the South. So what did he do? He went down to the port and got some sympathizers who were working on these ships and asked them to please disseminate his appeal throughout southern ports to pass this on to black people. And of course, in previous conversation, I've talked about how there were several all black crews on some of these ships. And so getting that information and having it transported to these black ports was not going to be an issue because there were a lot of black men who were already, um, part of that shipping industry. And so the word got out that Africans needed to fight for their liberation. And Mr. Walker's life, of course, was in jeopardy. Um, and upon writing his third edition, they said about 2 months later, he was found dead in his home in New York. But the damage was already done. He had sent this out, and so I had it's about 8 pages if you pull it up on the internet. But I just wanted to read this little excerpt from it. And I believe that there are nice white people, so I'm going to start with that. But this one says the whites have always been an unjust, jealous, unmerciful, avaricious, and bloodthirsty set of beings, always seeking after power and authority. This is what he wrote. And what was it? 1829. And so the whole thing, a lot of it is through a Christian worldview, stating that these people are pretending to be Christians, and they're advocating for this Christian worldview, and then feel like they're gonna stand before Jesus and get into heaven, and that's not happening according to David Walker. But as you can see, that line right there, that one line was enough to put his life in jeopardy. And unfortunately, he died very young because he was 1796 to 1830. He was just a child. He was just a young thing out here doing that because 1800, 1830, he was just in his 30s when he did that. So that is my boy, um, uh, David Walker, who I think is a great guy. Then the next person that I wanted to talk about was Henry Highland Garnet. Now, Henry Highland Garnet was around when Frederick Douglass was, and Frederick Douglass and Martin Delany. He was in that era, and even Fred said he was too much. He said, "You are too radical." He promoted a militant approach to anti-slavery. So I guess he would be more on the Black Panther end. And he also wanted Africans to immigrate back to Africa. So he was a pro, go back to Africa. Let's go back. Let's get out of here. And Henry Highland Garnet, this is a picture of Mr. Garnet. Garnet was a nice, very handsome man. Henry Highland Garnet. Um, he was born in uh, 1815, December 23rd, 1815, and he died in February 13, 1882. In 1865, he made a speech to Congress, and he was the first African American to speak before Congress and advocated for the 13th Amendment. He was his family, he was born a slave, but what is crazy is that his mother, I think both of his parents were enslaved. But his family managed to escape to New York in 1825 by pretending they were attending a funeral. So I have no idea about all the details of that. And I would love to find out because I think, there are a whole lot of black people out here who need to do these movies and documentaries about these Mission Impossible level escapes that our people engaged in. But they managed to escape to New York City, Garnet was able to attend school in 1834, and then when he was a young man, he he and Alexander Crummell, who was another, he was a doctor. He ended up being an African American doctor. They were able to galvanize about 120 young people, and all of these people were under the age of 20, 150. I'm sorry, to become abolitionists and fight for the liberation of those people. 1830s, And so they said he also traveled to Cuba in 1829 and 1828. And like I said, he actually became an advocate for a return to Africa, and eventually did make it to Liberia. Unfortunately, he only lived for two months when he got there, but he did make it to Liberia in 1882. But just to understand that these people, that we've had these black revolutionaries, I mean, I've got 1780s, I got 1800s, I've got 1700s. We know people were fighting in the 1600s. We know about these fights, and as you read about these people's lives, you understand why there's this deliberate erasure of our history, just overlooking the history, because we have a legacy of freedom fighting, and it's not contemporary. It has always been. Um, I've got here Martin Delaney. Now, Martin Delaney is my boy. Martin Delaney ain't no joke. Uh, Martin Delaney. Martin Delaney. Martin Delaney is another one whose mother was a free woman and his dad was enslaved. And so, because, they had a law, if your mother was uh free, then you could be free. You remember they wrote that little stinky law in the books, so that uh in to because people were applying for lawsuits or bringing lawsuits. If their dad was white and free, then they should have been free. So Europeans, like uh Henry Garnet said, they tripping. um they want us to go along with this nonsense, and then they're going to keep us free. I forgot to write something. Oh wait, this was Henry Henry Highland Garnet also had a paper, and his was Garnet's Call to Rebellion. You can look that up too. And his says, let your motto be resistance, resistance, resistance. No oppressed people have ever secured their liberty without resistance. What kind of resistance you had better make, you must decide by the circumstances that surround you and according to the suggestion of expediency. Brethren, I do trust in the living God, labor for the peace of the human race, and remember that you are 4 millions. Look, he was telling us, look, don't be playing that game. Get out here and fight. So this is Henry Highland Garnet. Now back to Martin Delaney. So Martin Delaney was born in 1812 in Charleston, West Virginia. Charlestown, West Virginia. Um, let's see. His mother after he was born, and he died in 1885. Um, he died in Wilberforce, Connecticut. No, Wilberforce, Ohio. I don't know what I'm thinking. And because his mother was free, she wanted to make sure he was educated, but she had to leave. They had to move from where they lived because it was illegal to teach anybody black how to read in West Virginia. So they moved and they ended up going, I think, I can't remember where did they say that they moved. Maybe that's where it was, Ohio. Um, he published a newspaper, The Mystery, in 1843, and then he joined Frederick Douglass in writing The North Star. Um, this dude went to Harvard in 1850, but was kicked out when they found out that he was African American, and all the white kids got together and he and two other black students or applicants. Well, I guess they were registered. They became students. Were kicked out of Harvard. Um, let's see. He wrote The Condition, Elevation, Immigrating, and Destiny of the Colored People of the United States. Um, he believed that only black people could resolve their fight for freedom by returning to Africa. So he like agreed with Garnet that Africans need to just go back to Africa. And in 1859, he led an expedition to the Niger River, Benin, Nigeria, to return. And he said, just get away from white people. Just get away from white people. That's all he wanted to say. He wanted to do. But in 1861, after when the Civil War started, he returned to the USA um, to join the Civil War. Now, what civil to fight in the Civil War? So what's crazy, not crazy, but just like interesting, is that he was there with Frederick Douglass um, uh, when they were asking Abraham Lincoln to get these troops. This dude said he recruited 1,000 men, black men to fight, and he wanted to create their own corps, and it was called the All Black Corps. Let's see, 52nd U.S. Colored Troop re- uh, Regiment. Regiment. There you go. And he became the first black officer in the United States of American history and U.S. history. He was also assigned to the Freedmen's Bureau. He ran for lieutenant governor of South Carolina. He is considered the father of black nationalism, and he wrote a couple of books. I One of the books that I have is the um, Blake or the Huts of America. He wrote this in 1862, and it's about 300-400 pages long. This is something. This book is amazing. But the Blake or the Huts of America, I suggest you read it. It's in the language of that period. So that vernacular can be very hard to navigate because it sounds like old English or whatever. But he also speaks when he in his African American characters, the enslaved, he speaks in that dialect too. So he was just a brilliant writer. He talks about going to Cuba. He talks about insurrection here in the States. The book is fascinating, but it was written in 1862, and I think it was written in like a little series he had in the North Star. And so what happened is that they pulled all of the stories together and made a book. And I'm not even sure that that's the final. That is the collection of all of the stories, but it was a story that he was like comic series, I guess, where people are putting these little stories in newspapers, and they become they're cumulative stories over a period of time. But uh, he is said to have literally bullied Abraham Lincoln into giving him that position, and he ended up getting becoming the first major black person to be an officer in the U.S. Army. So and he was all over the world. And the same thing with the, Garnet. They were like traveling. Um, the other person I wanted to bring up here was let's see, Richard Allen and Absalom Jones. They are very interesting as well. These are two men who started the um, uh, African Methodist Episcopal Church, and they started this church because they had joined the Methodist church. I think that Absalom Jones had joined an Episcopal church, and they were there in the church, and they were serving as lay ministers. But there was so much racism in the church that one day, the white clergy just kicked them out, and so they said, "Okay, bet." And so, but let me start with okay. So Richard Allen was born in 1760. He died in 1831. Absalom Jones was born in 1746, and he died in 1818. Um, both of these men were born into slavery. This is Richard Allen, and this is Absalom Jones. Absalom Jones is a little older than Richard Allen, but Richard Allen purchased his freedom. And as I was speaking earlier, he it, it cost him $2,000 to get his freedom. $2,000 today is the equivalent of 59,000 something, something, something. So about $60,000. Can you imagine that you have to spend that much money on yourself to get to buy your freedom? So it that's insane. But anyway, these men went on, they got their freedom, they found their way to Philadelphia. They established a free African society.
Works. So what we
So,
saw was they were paying Wilson, I believe it was Wilson's, right?
oh, I'm sorry. So they did the preamble of the African Society. Um, and in this society, it says that Absalom, they said, where's Absalom Jones, Richard Allen, two men of the African race who, for their religious life and conversation, have obtained a good report. Um, Among men, these persons from a love to the people of their complexion, whom they beheld with sorrow. And it goes on to talk about religious and irreligious spaces. Um, but they formed a society without regard to religious tenets, provided the persons lived in an orderly and sober life. So if you needed help and you were living a decent life, uh, they would support you and your family and your widows and fatherless children. So they created this organization, but they were also um, very much a part of the Philadelphia abolitionist movement. What is most interesting about them is that they also started the African Masonic life in 1798. They petitioned the Pennsylvania state legislature for the abolition of slavery in 1799. Um, when George Washington, at the time, and most of us may know that George Washington actually, the first White House was in, not White House, but the first presidential residence was in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And they had this crazy law that if African enslaved Africans were in uh, um, Philadelphia for more than 6 months, then they could be automatically freed. And then if you reach a certain age, I think if you were 21, 23, something like that, then you also guaranteed your freedom. So George Washington thought he was cute. He said, okay, every 5.5 months, right before the 6 month thing occurred, he was going to send his people back. I had my children read this book. It's called Own a Judge. Never Caught, and there's an adult version of the book too. So that was the youth version of it. Anyway, it is believed that Richard Allen and Absalom Jones, because Richard Allen had a chimney sweeping business, he was cleaning George Washington's house fireplace, and so he obviously had some kind of contact with Ona Judge, who was the daughter, or no, who was an enslaved woman that worked in the house. She was maid for Martha Washington. Um, and she was also her dressmaker. So she was a really highly skilled woman. This woman, at the age of 23, managed to escape from George Washington, and who was at this point the first president of the United States and a general, and she escaped. Um, and they believe that Richard Allen and Absalom Jones had something to do with that because they would have been around her, and and they were working in all of these very wealthy people's houses, making that money. So yes, so that was the other thing he did. I'm running out of time here. Let me go on to Amos Beeman, and then I'll finish up with James Fortin. Amos Beeman is very important because this man um, was where did I put Amos Beeman? Where is his picture? Um, I don't have Amos Beeman's picture up here. I don't have it. So Amos Beeman was a African American who was a minister, and he too was pretty radical. He used his position in a church to fight for abolition, but he was also one of the pastors. I don't know how many of you remember the movie The Amistad, and it was Morgan Freeman's character who was engaged in trying to get Sinke, what we would call his name was Simbe Pia, but we call him Sinke, and he was on that ship that was he got hit. They had a resurrection, an insurrection on the ship, and so they gained control of the ship, but they still ended up in Connecticut. So they had there was a big fight for them to be enslaved or return to Cuba or whatever to and they eventually won there, because they were able to go back to Sierra Leone. But the thing about this is the Amos Beeman was one of the African American abolitionists who was involved in raising the money for them to fight their case. He was also involved. His church was also involved in raising the money for them to get back to Sierra Leone. So Amos Beeman was an amazing person. Uh, and so the let's see Beeman here. Yeah, there he is. And so that was interesting to learn about him. He was born in 1812 and he died in 1876. And he went to school, he went to college, and then, like I said, became an advocate for the members of the for Cinque. And then the last person is James Fortin. James Fortin, a lot of people know about James Fortin. He was a wealthy sail maker, owned in the shipping industry, and he also supported black suffrage. He worked with Richard Allen. He worked with Absalom Jones, and he did a lot of supporting of abolitionist movements. He was also an inventor and attended school, but he promoted black suffrage, and all his children, his wife, all of them were also very much engaged in black liberation. And so here's a picture of James Fortin, and let's see, and this is a picture of like the school that he attended. It's called the Benezet School, which was the Quaker school that was created for black children. And then this is a copy of a patent he received for his sail. He also invented a way to make sail for making boats go faster and easier to maneuver or navigate. And so, but he served in the Revolutionary War. He was captured by the British and imprisoned, freed, became a wealthy self-maker and wealthy cellmaker, abolitionist leader. But more importantly, these were African men who were committed to our liberation. And so I've gone over my time, but I wanted to make sure I share that. And next week we will talk about Sojourner Truth and what the ladies had to do with the abolitionist movement. Ashe.
I'm a St. Cia student. Of course I walk into the sound of drums.
I'm a St. Cia student. Of course I know my mom.
I'm a St. Cia student. Of course I can play the drums.
I'm a St. Cia student. Of course I can work with my hands.
I'm a St. Cia student.
If you're talking, they will hear you.
We all want our kids to grow up safe and healthy, so we show them how. And we tell them with honest conversations that let them know what we expect. Not just one time, but every chance we get. That's especially important when it comes to alcohol and other drugs. Kids not only need to know the dangers and how to avoid them, they need to hear it often from you. And when it comes to pain medications, opioids, they need to know that they should never be taken without a prescription and never shared with friends or family. It's dangerous and illegal. So talk with your kids and guide them through the challenges of growing up safe and healthy. Because when you talk, they hear you. For more information about talking with your kids about underage use of alcohol and other drugs, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov.
So